Volteface TV. My name's Paul North, I'm the director at Volteface, and in today's show, we're going to be looking at Germany's plans to legalise cannabis for adult use. We're going to be having a look at those plans in a bit of detail and discussing our initial takes and feedback on what those plans are proposing. We're going to speak to an industry expert to get their take on what those plans mean for the industry and how the industry is responding. We're also going to be looking at where Germany is currently at in that process of discussing those plans with the EU and highlight some of the areas where there might be a little bit of tension. But before we get into that, please, while you're here, like and subscribe. This is just the start of a diversification of our content, and there's going to be lots more to come. So if you're interested in global cannabis news, global drug policy reform, then please like and subscribe for more. And let us know what you think in the comments below. So first up, let's look at those plans in a little bit more detail. So Germany are proposing a maximum threshold for possession of cannabis to be at 30 grams, an allowance for home growing of up to 3 plants, a range of outlets to purchase cannabis from, which includes retail, pharmacies and online, a THC limit for those aged 18 to 21, a complete ban on advertising, an introduction of cigarette-style non-branded packaging, a graduated tax based on THC level, no importation of cannabis with all cannabis grown in Germany. Under 18s caught in possession of cannabis will not be criminalised, although the cannabis will be confiscated and the individual directed to a course. The location of dispensaries will be regulated with minimum distances to schools and youth facilities. So right off the bat, there are a few things that jump out here. First of all, it's fair to say that they're a sensible set of proposals. Nothing is too surprising. The THC limit for those aged 18 to 21 is a little bit concerning for me. I think that a legal regulated market should do everything it can in those early years of implementation to eliminate the illicit market. I think it should incentivise people to go to the legal market rather than the illicit. Now, we know that young people aged 18 to 21, the most commonly used drug for them is cannabis. And we know that amongst the different strains and and types of cannabis, young people typically either choose to or go to higher THC cannabis with higher levels of THC in. So to have a complete ban here feels like a little bit of an oversight. A ban on a THC limit for 18 to 21-year-olds will just lead for two things. It will incentivize the illicit market to distribute and to sell to them. And it will also incentivize young people to look to the illicit market. If they're, cannabis is now legal, let's go check it out. Oh, we can't get the cannabis that we normally get, or we can't try that cannabis. Well, I want to try that cannabis. I want to go get it. It incentivizes them to go to the illicit market. I understand the incentive here. The incentive is to try and get people to use lower levels of THC because there are concerns around high levels of THC. We're not going to get into that now. It's certainly a debate and a discussion, and one where there's a lot of misinformation, stigma and assumption. But either way, it's a position that most regulators take, is they would rather have people use, vaporize, consume lower levels of THC. But to just completely ban 18 to 21-year-olds from accessing those strains of cannabis feels like a little bit of a problem. I get where it's coming from, but don't think it will work in practice. Interestingly, the leaked plans which came out a few days before, these plans suggested that there was just a ban on THC. Whether that's something that the Germans sort of took some feedback on and changed their mind on, or whether it was just an incorrect leak, we probably won't ever know, but it's certainly interesting that they've got that on the table. The other thing to note in there is a graduated tax based on THC level. Again, this, from a public health perspective, this is about incentivizing people to use lower levels of THC, right? To think, well, you could use that, but it's the most expensive. Why not try that? Again, we know that high levels of cannabis with high levels of THC is the market preference. And while people might not like that, it's certainly, it's a starting point. If you want to eliminate the illicit market, that's where you've got to create the market. You have to meet the needs of the consumers. Now, it might be that in regulated markets, if it's well priced, if it's a more attractive proposition, people might put up with a graduated tax. But I think in early implementation, everything should be focused on eliminating the illicit. So anything that, for a consumer perspective, thinks, oh, that's a bit annoying, I can get that cheaper on the illicit market, or why should I pay so much more for the strain of cannabis I like? I think you have to park those public health concerns at the door, at least in the short term, to get the market working and active. But either way, it's not particularly surprising that it's on there. A few other bits to note is a no importation of cannabis, all cannabis to be grown in Germany. That's interesting. Is this Germany trying to reduce some of the concerns that are going to exist at an EU level with regards to the movement of cannabis Or is it Germany saying we want this to be about German industry, we want it grown, cultivated here in Germany so we can control it? Or is it both? Remains to be seen, but it's interesting that it's on there. And there'll be a lot of people in the industry kind of looking at that, thinking, how can I engage in that? What's that going to look like in practice? Home grain for 3 plants feels fairly restrictive. I think it could and should be more than 3, but it's a starting point for the discussion. Good that they've got no criminalisation of young people and diversionary educational costs instead. Very, very sensible. Range of outlets is also good. Having online off the bat is good because that's where the illicit market operates, and legal regulated markets should do everything they can to eliminate the illicit. So off the bat, having online sales is great because ultimately that's where the illicit market exists. It exists in online marketplace, WhatsApp, Telegram, the dark web, the dark net or whatever. So going there off the bat is very, very sensible. So on the whole, interesting starting point. The discussions obviously will take place and there may be some back and forth, but a sensible set of proposals, although I would put a line under the THC limit, and I think there's a little bit to discuss and explore there with how you eliminate illicit markets. I think there's a bit of learning for them to do there, but interesting starting point. So to find out what these proposals mean for the industry, we're going to speak to Aleister Moore, who's the co-founder of the Hanway company. Alastair, thanks so much for joining us on today's show.
Thanks for having me, Paul.
So first of all, I just wanted to ask you, what's your take to these German plans to legalise cannabis for adult use?
Draft is definitely the key word. The position paper they put out is, I guess, a statement of intent, kind of a roadmap. Lots of people have argued that it's not very detailed, especially compared to some other countries like Canada, who had produced documentation before they legalized. But I think we're at the start of this process, and it is that it's a process, and this is a draft of sorts. And over the next 6-9 months, we'll kind of see how it fleshes out. The big thing that it needs to get past now is the EU level alignment, the Schengen agreements, etc. And if it gets past that, then it's into the really exciting next phase. Because right now we know that the market, if it does exist, is going to be somewhat commercial. There's a commitment in there from the coalition government to build something consciously trying to tackle the black market, which is quite exciting. I know something that you're probably quite interested in as well. And I think what they've done is quite good, considering they're not cannabis experts. They'll get things wrong. They're special advisors. They're civil servants. They've done a couple of research trips to markets with legal cannabis. Where they've landed is, where most sensible people looking at this for the first time or on a scale like this might land. They've put together something that may suit people who do like cannabis and also those people who don't like cannabis in society. And that's the process. It's give and take. It's a bit messy. There's lots of rounds of feedback. You have to get sign off from your neighbors. Then local advocacy and stakeholder groups can get involved. The process is now open, and that's great to see.
Great. That's great, Alastair. Cheers. And my second question then was, how is the industry reacting to these plans? What have you kind of been hearing and seeing online?
Well, there's a lot of hot takes for sure. I think we're all prone to making this mistake as well, which is making statements about projections about where things will go and how things will happen that are essentially just what we would like to see. And I think that's a bias that it's very, very hard to control if you're so close to an industry or if you've studied or worked in it for a certain amount of time. And I think on the other end of the kind of hot take spectrum, you've got the cynicism. This will never work. There's so many barriers between here and legalization. And I think kind of from both of those kind of standpoints, I think you need to kind of zoom out a little bit and understand just how big a social change this is. And the fact that we're even having this discussion is momentous. And a couple of years ago, we wouldn't even imagined it. And I think, one thing that I'm quite certain of, having watched this for the best part of a decade is, change can take a long time to come, but then it can happen very quickly. And I think what we're seeing is, people's differing perceptions or different definitions of what quickly looks like, depending what timeline you're looking at this change through, what lens you're looking at it through. And I think there's a policymaker timeline, and that is that thinks in terms of governments or successive governments and policy making timelines and how long it takes to implement legislation. It takes 9 months or 12 months. Whatever there's kind of set timelines to view progress to. Then you've got business timelines that have cash burn considerations. It's got evaluation of the most current opportunities. They've got investors breathing down their neck. There's a certain urgency around being a business owner in a space like this, and how you view and react to regulations. And then there's the investor timeline, and investors all have different objectives. Some want quick returns. Some are longer term investors. Some a lot of them have their own investors who have their own expectations of return timelines, and differing levels of understanding of how a business grows within this sector, how the sector grows, and how businesses exit, and all that kind of thing. So there's just a really complex mesh of different viewpoints, and the kind of reaction of the industry is reflected in some of those. And I think the only thing that you can do at this point, especially if you're a business, is engage with the process that we just talked about, and try and influence in any way you can a market that you feel is going to help your business be sustainable or successful. And the only other kind of strategic thing that I think you can really do is build flexibility into your model. And flexibility, it could mean ability to be vertically integrated or not vertically integrated, to have, to expand across borders, or have certain assets that are plant touching or not plant touching. There's loads of elements of flexibility that entrepreneurs need to consider. Who they take capital from, what kind of expectations those investors will have, is all those things. So the more flexible you can be in a market at a moment like this, the better positioned you are. And I think, as great as it would be to be in an established business right now with a war chest and a reputation in the market, you may have to retrofit your way into a new market. You may have to twist and turn your business model to make it fit with how the regulations develop. So it is a good time to be building a business from scratch, I think. And I think what we'll see is some new entrepreneurs appearing on the scene to tackle the challenges. But yeah, by and large, the industry is reacting kind of chaotically as expected, with positive and negative sentiment at both ends of the spectrum, and less voices of reason and voices of knowledge at this point.
Alice, that was great. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm sure we'll be speaking to you again soon. So let's just get a quick update on where Germany is at in this process. Well, they're currently at the preliminary examination procedure, and that's where the EU checks to see whether the proposed legislation by Germany fits within EU law, and either give it the go-ahead or stop it in its tracks. Now, technically, there are kind of 4 paths which this could go down. The first is they could just give it the green light and say, yep, this legislation does fit within EU law, you are good to go ahead. They could, secondly, ask for more restrictions and say there are certain areas of this where we would like to see amendments or more discussions, or give us more security and more reassurance that this isn't going to be an issue. They may oppose the plans completely, or they may wait to pass judgment until a draft law is actually in place. Many people have pointed out that at the moment it's not actually in a draft law. It's a cornerstone document. There's certainly information there, but it's not the draft law. So the EU may just say, no, come back when there's a draft law. It's hard to say on a time frame, but normal procedure is around 3 to 6 months. So we'll be keeping a close eye on it. We'll be speaking to people on the ground and getting ahead of that preliminary examination procedure. But at the moment, they're the current possible outcomes. So let's look at where those areas of tension between Germany and the EU sit. Well, the first is the EU Framework Decision of 2004, says that each state has a fundamental duty to criminalise the manufacture, sale and delivery of narcotic substances regardless of the conditions. Some German lawyers have already pointed out that this is only the case without appropriate authorisation, and in this case Germany will be legalising it with appropriate authorisation from their country and their state, and they will only be able to do so if it hits authorisation at EU level. So few people are particularly worried about that because it will seek and ascertain appropriate authorization. The areas where there's going to be more tension is essentially around the movement of cannabis. Okay, so you think about Germany just in terms of its location, it's bordered by 5 countries. And in those 5 countries, they're going to be asking the question, how can you assure us that cannabis isn't just going to cross an unregulated, unchecked border? What systems and protocols do you have in place to prevent that? Because as part of the Schengen Protocol, it says that states must prevent the illicit export of narcotics of all kinds, including cannabis products, as well as the sale, procurement and delivery of these funds by administrative and criminal means. Also very similar to the EU Resolution Council of 1996, which says that states must take appropriate steps to prevent the mass entry of people into the country for the purpose of using cannabis. So that's where the tension is going to exist. It's going to exist around the movement and procurement of the drug. That might be why Germany has gone for in-house Germany cultivation only, to reassure people maybe over some of these things, to reduce the amount of cannabis that's crossing a border. We're not quite sure at this stage, but it's worth flagging. Ultimately, what this Germany is going to rely on is getting support from the countries nearby who are already liberal with regards to cannabis. So they're going to be looking to those EU countries who have legal medical cannabis schemes. They're going to be looking to Czech Republic, who are currently debating legalised adult use model. They're going to be looking at the Netherlands, who we know are already liberal around cannabis and trialling their own model of legalisation and legal supply, because it's much more complicated than most people assume in the Netherlands. And they're also going to be looking to those EU countries where cannabis is decriminalised and hoping that enough countries stand alongside Germany and say, we think this is a positive step. It's not a step that we're ready to take yet, or it's not one we're undergoing, but we think it's safe and we think it's a good sign. We think that there is more for Germany to gain through legalisation than it has to lose. And I think ultimately, as long as Germany can assure these countries, particularly those 5 bordering countries, that it's not going to suddenly have a huge issue with regards to cannabis tourism, then there should be okay. So many people in Germany are positive. The German health minister, Karl Lauterbach, is positive. He thinks that the EU will sign it off. We think there's certainly going to be some discussion and negotiation there. It may just get bounced back because it's not currently a draft law, but Germany will definitely be hoping that those surrounding countries give it the green light, and that those other countries in the EU who are positive and liberal on the issue support Germany's plans. So thanks so much for watching today's show, giving you an update on German cannabis legalisation. We've got lots more content to come, not just on Germany, but in a whole range of global drug policy, cannabis policy issues. So please like and subscribe. And also while you're here, let us know what you think of the show. Let us know in the comments below. And if you've got anything to add to this discussion, this debate, get in touch. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.